All right. Good evening, everyone. I am thrilled to welcome you this evening. We've got a nice, small but mighty crowd here in person, but we've got a number of people who are joining us online tonight as well. I know many of you, but for those I don't know, my name is Jill Ferris. I'm Vice President of Education and Interpretation here at CBMM, and I'm pleased to welcome you this evening. Bringing in speakers to talk about topics that are relevant to the world around us is, I think, one of the more fun parts of my job, and especially when we're talking about Chesapeake Bay and the processes, what's happening in the news around us. So I'm glad that you're here and that we can connect with two experts this evening who can give us some insight about some of the ongoing work that's happening here in the Chesapeake. If you've been to any of our speaker programs, you will know that I like to share what's coming up. I was telling Anna that this winter has been the most wild winter of booking speaker programs I have experienced, in that everybody I have scheduled, we've had something come up, illness, retirement, like every schedule. If I've planned it, we've changed the schedule. So thank you for bearing with me. Thank you for bearing with us. As always, more change. Waterman Story Swap is postponed. And the next programs that we'll have are coming up in April. We will be partnering with Maryland Public Television for the second time to host the second annual Chesapeake Bay Week Film Festival. So starting in the beginning of April, we'll be screening a selection of films with special programming at each screening to enhance your viewing experience. On Saturday, April 5th at 11 a.m., we will be screening Creatures of the Chesapeake, which is our family film screening. We'll pull up our oyster cages and have critters, so you're welcome to come. This is fun for all ages, but you can get up close and personal. On the film, we'll show some of the critters, but we'll have critters from our river as well, so you can spend some time with an oyster. On Monday, April 7th at 5:30, we will be screening Eaten the Chesapeake, two of the films from that series, and our film screening will be paired with a tasting prepared by Garden and Garnish. So we'll be screening Eaten Blue Catfish and the Five Feasts. So some deep cuts, but I'm excited to have food paired with that screening. On Thursday, April 10th at 5:30, we'll be premiering one of the new films this year, Resurrecting Poplar Island, which is one of the anchor events for this coming Chesapeake Bay Week. So please look forward to a screening and discussion about that film. And finally, on Wednesday, April 16th, we will be premiering Chesapeake Rhythms, which is the latest film from Tom Horton, Dave Harp, and Sandy Cannon Brown, the 9th film in their series. Tom, Dave, and Sandy will all be here for a discussion after that film screening. So that is a very special event. I hope you'll come and join us for that one. And for all of them, mark your calendars. I'm hoping to have them live on the website before the weekend. But this evening, I've been looking forward to this talk since last fall. I'm really excited to introduce our speakers, Anna Killius and Leila Duman. Anna is the Executive Director of the Chesapeake Bay Commission. She earned her BA in History with a concentration in Applied Mathematics from the University of Dallas, and then went on to William and Mary Law School. Leila serves as the Bay's Restoration Officer at Maryland Department of Natural Resources and has a PhD in Chemistry from the University of Maryland and a BA in Chemistry from Bard College. This evening, they'll be taking a look at what's coming up and what's ongoing with the Chesapeake Bay restoration. Signed in 2014, the Chesapeake Bay Watershed Agreement established goals and outcomes for the restoration of the bay, its tributaries, and the lands that surround them. With many of those outcomes targeted for achievement by 2025, now, a group of Chesapeake leaders have worked to identify the future of that Chesapeake Bay Watershed Agreement and what is next for conservation in the Chesapeake. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the microphone over. Anna is here with us in person, and we have leaders joining us remotely from Annapolis this evening. So we've got a fabulous hybrid audience, hybrid presenters, and it should be a good evening.
Well, thank you for having us here today. Really excited to share what the restoration work looks like right now and kind of what the partners are thinking as we plan for the future of Bay restoration beyond the year 2025. Before we get started, I'll just begin by a little bit of explanation of who we are at the Chesapeake Bay Commission. Okay, so just a little bit about who the Chesapeake Bay Commission is, and then I'll hand it to Leila to talk about Maryland Department of Natural Resources. So the commission was initially created in the 1980s by Maryland and Virginia in recognition of the important role that state legislators were going to need to play in the restoration effort around the Chesapeake Bay. Pennsylvania was later convinced to join in 1985, and we've been chugging along all three of those states ever since. We are a product of state law, not federal law. We are in the code in all three states. We are supported by all three states through state funding, and I am a state employee here in Maryland. Our members, we have 21 commission members. Most of those are state legislators. So 7 people from each state, 5 of whom are legislators, 2 senators, 3 members of the House. 1 is always a cabinet level appointee from the governor, and then 1 is a citizen member. So here in Maryland, Senator Sarah Love is our chair, and she's joined by Senator Mary Washington. Dana Stein is our vice chair, and he's joined by Julian Ivey and Sheila Ruth. Secretary Josh Kurtz is, of course, our cabinet level appointee, and our Maryland citizen member is currently an unfilled position. If you know Vincent Leggett, he was our Maryland citizen member, and we were very sad to lose him last year. The mission of the commission is basically threefold. We support and promote science-based policies that promote the restoration of the Chesapeake Bay in all 3 states. So our legislators are pushing policies and budget requests that we think will help us move the needle. We are the legislative voice within the Bay program. So everybody else in the Bay program represents an executive agency or a governor. We are the only voice when it comes to the legislatures. And then we coordinate policy interests with Congress. So we are able to directly go to Congress and let them know what we think we need when it comes to federal agency authorizations, funding, support, technical assistance. And we do that from one group of bipartisan legislators to another. Oh, so close. There we go. Okay, handing it to you, Leila.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Anna. So hello, folks. Again, my name is Leila Duman. I'm the Bay's Restoration Officer here at Maryland DNR. So very top line view there. We are a cabinet level department for the state of Maryland. We were established in our current form in 1969, but actually there are many units that make up DNR today that go back as far as the 1800s. As Anna noted, Secretary Josh Kurtz is our current secretary. He also sits on the Chesapeake Bay Commission. Currently, DNR has units that cover boating, fishing, forestry, hunting, lands, park, police, waters, and wildlife. So the thing to know here about DNR is that we are the lead agency for Maryland when it comes to the Chesapeake restoration process. The goal of DNR is to preserve, protect, restore, and enhance the state's natural resources, making sure that we are doing that in a way that is informed by science. And as we will get to a little bit further on in this process, right now, Maryland has a really unique role in the Chesapeake Bay Partnership. So I will turn it back to you, Anna, to get us to the next slide.
All right. So I'm a firm believer that when you give a presentation, you tell people what you're going to tell them, then you tell them, and then you tell them what you told them, just in case anyone has to leave early. So if there's anything you take away from our presentation today, I hope it is these 2 things. So first, after 40 years of progress because of partnership, guided by the Chesapeake Bay Watershed Agreement, which is the current document that frames our work, we need to recognize our progress. We need to acknowledge the challenges that we're facing, and then we need to strategize for the future. And that's the moment we're in, strategizing for that future. The Chesapeake Bay Commission and Maryland are going to continue to be leaders in this work as we plan for the future of watershed conservation. And it's going to be state-led, bipartisan, and collaborative. That's the way that this program has managed to hold its own for 40 years. It's what's going to sustain us for the next 40 years. So those are the takeaways. And now we're going to do our best to prove the point. this is our agenda. We're going to set the stage, just making sure that everybody is on the same page when it comes to the terminology that we use. There's a lot of Chesapeake Bay fill in the blank organizations. So in this alphabet soup, sometimes it's best just to make sure that we all know what we mean when we say Chesapeake Bay Commission, Chesapeake Bay, what have you. Then we're going to talk about the moment that we're in. You may have heard beyond 2025. What does that mean? Why do we keep talking about being beyond 2025? And then we'll talk about how we're making progress through partnership, even as we strategize for the future. All right, setting the stage. Do you want to take it away here, Leila?
Yeah, perfect. Happy to. So as Anna said, lots of different things have lots of different names. When we say the Chesapeake Bay program, this is what we mean. The program is made up of all 9 signatories to the Chesapeake Bay Agreement that Jill was discussing at the very introduction. So these are the 6 watershed states, the District of Columbia, and EPA on behalf of all the participating federal agencies, as well as the Chesapeake Bay Commission. So we collectively together are the program, and the heads of each of these entities make up what we call the Executive Council. So the partnership behind the program, however, is a lot more extensive than just these 9 signatories. It includes all the participating state and federal agencies, research institutions, nonprofit organizations, private industry, and public stakeholders. So it's a really extensive and vast network that's basically as complex as the estuary that we're working to protect. And a really critical part to note here is that this participation in this partnership is voluntary. There are, of course, interconnected regulatory components that we'll get to in a moment, but participation in this partnership and in this Bay program is a voluntary compact and relies on building consensus among all these signatories. Next slide, please, Anna. Great. So a quick history of the Bay program, since we've just explained what it is. We have to go back to the 1970s when Senator Mac Mathias took a 5-day tour of the Chesapeake Bay after hearing complaints from watermen and researchers about how poorly the estuary was doing. Upon seeing these problems firsthand, he sponsored a 5-year study to analyze the rapid loss of aquatic life in the Bay. And what the study found was that poor water quality was a major contributor to the decline. With this in mind, the governors of Maryland and Pennsylvania and Virginia, as well as the mayor of DC and the EPA administrator and the chair of the Chesapeake Bay Commission, came together to sign the very first Chesapeake Bay Agreement, a 1-page pledge to work collaboratively to protect and improve water quality and living resources in the Bay. As you can see, there are a number of timeline points here, and I won't get into all of them, but what you need to know is that since that time, our knowledge base has grown, both of the needs and opportunities for the Bay. So the program and the agreement have become more sophisticated over time as those goals we set and the tools we use for planning and accountability have also evolved. We're working right now under the guidance of the 4th iteration of the Chesapeake Bay Watershed Agreement with the goals and targets that it identifies for the program as established in 2014. I'll turn it back to you, Anna.
All right, and this is the 2014 Chesapeake Bay Watershed Agreement in a nutshell. It has one vision that's shared by all of the partners, so all 9 of those signatories that we covered at the just a second ago, 10 goals that we think are high-level ways of understanding what it means to fulfill that vision, and then 31 outcomes, and those outcomes are specific, measurable, time-bound targets that we use to assess if we're making progress on the goals and the vision. So just to kind of highlight in the vision, you'll see that we talk about clean water, abundant life, conserved lands and access, cultural heritage, and a diversity of engaged stakeholders. And in the 10 goals, which you see depicted at the bottom, they basically cover the same things. These are the big buckets under which we function. And you'll note that it's more than just clean water. It's also about the fisheries and the toxic contaminants. It's about environmental literacy so that we're creating the next generation of stewards. We also talk about stewardship itself to see if we're encouraging and empowering folks throughout the watershed to do their part in protecting this resource. So it's really a very holistic agreement. It covers a number of things that we think all need to be worked on in order to collectively reach this vision. And we're making really meaningful progress on this agreement. So there's a lot of talk about how we're falling short, but it's important to acknowledge that we've done a lot together to make this watershed and this bay better in the last 40 years, even if we haven't gotten all the way to where we expect it to be at this point. So in 2023, we recorded the smallest dead zone on record. And dead zones are areas where there's a reduced level of oxygen in the water, which either kills the marine life or encourages them to move out of that area. So we want the smallest dead zone we possibly can get. And we had the smallest one recorded in 2023. We have over 1.6 million acres of land that have been protected since 2011, which makes up 22% of the watershed. Protected land is important because that is what helps clean our water. It's what helps recharge our groundwater sources that we all rely on. That protected land is kind of our fail-safe for the future of clean water. We've seen 3 consecutive years of improvement in our underwater grasses, critical to both the clarity of the water and habitat for fisheries. We've taken on the largest oyster restoration effort in the world, and we are on track to exceed the goal that we set ourselves, which was restoring 10 tributaries by 2025. Our forest buffers have long been a priority for us. So forest buffers are those areas right along stream banks and rivers. If you can keep them forested, keep trees in place, it prevents erosion, so keeping sediment out of your stream, and also helps to clean the water, the runoff, before it can hit the stream with excess nutrients or pollution. So having forested buffers along our river is a huge priority. It's also a huge challenge because we're running up against kind of the development pressures that come from land and from our growth. But we installed over 640 miles of forest buffers in 2023 alone, and that is the highest number planted since 2016. And that's because we have more resources than we ever have before, and the partnerships that we've put in place are working. I'll take this one and then I'll hand it back over to you, Leila. It's not all good news. So we've done great things through partnership. We are far better off now than we would have been if we had not been working together and collaboratively. But we are aware that we are falling short. So when you take all 31 of those outcomes and you look at whether we are on course for the target we set, off course or uncertain, we know that 18 are on course or completed, 13 are off course or uncertain, and the biggest one you hear about in the news is 2025 WIPs. What does WIPs mean? Watershed Implementation Plan. So those are the plans the states and the jurisdictions put in place on how they would put practices in place on ground to clean water. They each had plans. They're each working on them. But we know that by 2025, we will not have all the practices in place that we need in order to complete those plans. And that's what you hear about right now. We're falling short, and we know it, and we have the records to show by how much. So that's the question we're in right now. If we know we've completed some things and we know we haven't completed others, what do we do now that we're in this moment? So I'll hand it to you, Leila.
Thank you so much. The answer for what we do is beyond 2025. We have to consider what comes next. So next slide, please, Anna. So when you look at the outcomes that Anna was just going through, what you'll see in a lot of them is this 2025 date. But the key thing to remember about 2025 is that it's a target date, a deadline, but not a finish line. So by the end of 2025, jurisdictions are supposed to have all of their practices in place to meet the Chesapeake Bay total maximum daily load. And that's going to allow us to achieve our water quality standards by lowering the nutrient, sediment, pollution that's coming into our waters. So by 2025, we've aimed to restore historical fish migration routes and open an additional 132 miles of fish passage every 2 years. Another thing we've set for ourselves by 2025 is wanting to add 85,000 acres of new or reestablished wetlands and enhance 150,000 acres of degraded wetlands. So now that we're in 2025, we have to figure out, how do we assess where we are and how do we decide where we're going next? So for outcomes that we've met, like fish passage, Is there a new target that we want to set? Do we want to say that these successes have been really a result of great partnership and that we think we can set new goals for ourselves? But for some outcomes that we haven't yet been able to achieve, like our watershed implementation plans or our wetland targets, do we decide that we want to set a new deadline for that work and continue on in our same process? Or do we really need to rethink the way that we are approaching this target, given the latest science, given everything that we've learned over the last decade since 2014? Really, what we're using this for is to make a plan for the future of the partnership. And as we move past this checkpoint, not a finish point, that's what the Beyond the process is. Anna, next slide, please. So in 2022, the Executive Council started thinking about what comes next. And they charged the Chesapeake Bay program with recommending a plan to chart a course for Beyond 2025. And over the past year or so, there's been a steering committee that was drawn from various stakeholders across the partnership that's really been thinking critically about how to strategize for the future of this partnership. And it comes down to two core components: what we do and how we work together. So what we do is driven by the goals and outcomes of the watershed. If we want to give a new direction to the work of the partnership, we need to address that in the agreement. How we work together is driven by the structure of the program, the governance framework. So are there efficiencies that we can gain in how we work together, or how we need to address the way that we meet as a larger partnership to achieve these collective goals? Next slide, please. So this is really what the steering committee recommended when it came to those two core components. In terms of what we do, we need to affirm, continue, and amend. We need to affirm the continuing commitment to the partnership. So our partnership and restoration doesn't end in 2025 just because we've hit this certain time period. We need to continue to make progress under the 2014 agreement with the plans that we do have in place. So we're not pausing, we're not slowing down here. And we need to amend the existing agreement in order to achieve these goals and address the challenges that we're facing. So update the outcomes to make sure that they are giving us proper guidance as a partnership on what we should be working on post-2025. In terms of how we work together, the results was staying strong, simplified, and streamlined. So as a partnership, we're going to remain strong, but we're going to find ways to simplify and streamline our structure and processes so that we can be more effective and inclusive going forward. Back to you, Anna.
All right. Ooh. Okay. That same steering committee looked at what a couple more recommendations when it comes to the core things that the program is known for: science, partnership, and restoration and conservation. And so as we go through refreshing the existing agreement, so again, not writing a new one, but updating the current one, we're encouraged to look at a couple of these additional recommendations as we do that. So in science, monitoring as being very important. So if we are doing the work, we need to be monitoring the results in the watershed, in the water, to see if they're working, not just modeling them. Modeling is important. It's your best guess at what's happening, but monitoring shows you what's actually happening out there in the water. So put more emphasis into the monitoring. Knowledge gaps. So we know that the environmental conditions that we're working under are changing. What we planned for 30 years ago is not what we're seeing right now, and we know it's not what we're going to see in the future. So we need to close some of these knowledge gaps about how these things are going to impact the work we're doing, whether it's climate, land use change, or social science, understanding how we work together. In restoration and conservation, we need to elevate conservation and nearshore habitats. We talk a lot about restoration, bringing back what's lost. But what we need to do is pay attention to what we are losing and conserving things that we already have, because once they're lost, it's much harder to get it back. So you'll see more of an emphasis on how do we keep the forests we have? How do we keep the wetlands we have? Not just restore wetlands that we've lost. Nearshore habitats, those are the places where land, water, fish, and people meet. So these are critical habitats. We need to be investing in them because this is where you potentially get the most bang for your buck, both in the people that are benefited from the work we're doing and the living resources bouncing back. We should take a holistic approach. So again, looking at all of those components at the same time as we do this work. In partnership, we need to build capacity through local networks. A lot of this work has to happen on land, on privately owned land, on land that's controlled by local governments. So when the states come to the table to talk about land use, there's only so many tools they have. We need local networks of people ready to apply some of these lessons and make the difference in their local communities. And then when we communicate, we need to be better about communicating, use simpler language, be more transparent. It's really hard to understand everything that's happening within the Bay program. We use a lot of jargon and technical language. We have a lot of groups and work groups and bureaucracy to it. And it's hard to participate if you can't figure out what's going on. So we need to be better about communicating and more transparent about how we're doing it. So based on those recommendations from the steering committee, the executive council, so those governors, the administrator of the EPA, the chair of my commission, and the mayor of DC said, okay, thank you for those recommendations. Here's what we're charging you to do next. So make every effort to prepare revisions to this agreement by the end of this calendar year. We have 1 year to do our best to get all of this in place. Again, not a new agreement, a refreshed agreement. We're not doing a full rewrite, so you can do it in a year. We'll see. And when we do that, we need to engage all communities. We need to address water quality and living resources. It's not just about clean water. It's about why we need the clean water, the living resources, and the people that rely on that water. Elevate conservation, ground yourself in the science, and make sure that you're measurable, you're time-bound, you're working as quickly as possible. When it comes to structure, again, simplify the structure. Make sure that we can move more effectively, more efficiently, and importantly, more inclusively. We're going to need everybody working on this together. We are going to need everybody to do their part. And the only way to do that is to make sure that we are inclusive enough and simple enough that people can find their place in the work that we're doing. We have a little bit longer to do this part, substance before structure. So we have to have some recommendations ready by the end of this year. And then we have until halfway through next year to incorporate those into our governance document. Leila.
Yeah, so turning back to that substance that Anna was talking about, we are, as we speak, working on beginning this revision process. So the first thing that's happening is that the Executive Council has tasked their principal staffers with making revisions to the vision, goals, and outcomes of the agreement. So you saw our vision earlier. We're taking a look to see, does this still hold? Is this still reflective of the way that we as a partnership are thinking about this process and what we're hoping to achieve? The other thing that is happening, as we've alluded to a few times, is that the outcomes are being revised. Again, these are by a large number of different stakeholders that are weighing in on this process and saying, do we think that these outcomes are still relevant and effective, and how can we make them better going forward? Ultimately, we're going to be putting together all of this revised material for public comment that's going to be available for 2 months over the summer, beginning in July. So I would encourage you, as people who are interested in this process, to keep an eye out. And when that information is available for the public, we would love to see feedback. You know, are these goals reflective of what you think a restored bay means to you? The structure and governance conversations, as Anna said, the structure, are ongoing. We've started to take a look within our own partnership about what where there are efficiencies we can draw from, what has been really successful, and as Anna mentioned, how do we make this a more inclusive process? So we have a little bit more time, it's ongoing, but we are jumping in whole cloth here for a very, very busy year. Next slide, please. So even as we are thinking about what comes next in the Beyond 25 process, we are still making progress now. And it's really, really important to emphasize we're not pausing things, we're not taking our foot off the gas, and we are not backing away from the challenges that are in front of us. And, we've really been scaling up across the jurisdictions that the CBC represents and across Maryland. Next slide, please. So this is a picture from the last Executive Council meeting of the Chesapeake Bay program. And the theme that you saw, if you tuned in, was "We are all in." This was the governors of Pennsylvania, Virginia, and Maryland, who each, in their own words, reiterated that continuing commitment to the partnership and to meeting our shared goals. And each of these states has a lot of progress that they can and should be proud of. One thing that I think is really important to emphasize, and I know Anna will do this a little bit later as well, is that one of our key partners here is Pennsylvania. They're the largest landholder in the Chesapeake Bay watershed with 85,000 miles of rivers and streams, which is actually the highest density of any state in the nation. So it's a challenge to ask, how do we make sure that they are, that we know what's good for our local waters, because that's also what's good for the Bay. So at a recent report card from the University of Maryland, the Upper Bay received one of the highest scores that it's received and is showing the most improvement in all regions across the Bay. And over the last 5 years, Pennsylvania has made a lot of progress in terms of reductions to their nutrient load from the Chesapeake Bay. So in the last I believe it's in the last 5 years, they've made 5 times the reductions that they had made in the previous 10 years. So there's a real sense of ownership and excitement here. And I think you can hear that as you start to engage with the different stakeholders. Virginia has also had a really strong relationship with Governor Youngkin's administration. He's been all in on this as well. And funding for Virginia's non-point source program has really been blooming and blossoming. They have an agricultural cost share program that's been fully funded at record levels. And Governor Youngkin's former Natural and Historic Resources Secretary, Travis Foyles, recently announced that he was leaving the Youngkin administration to serve as the deputy administrator, the assistant deputy administrator at EPA. So having a former commission member and colleague of ours at EPA is really a critical opportunity for us. We need to continue EPA's leadership and support of the Bay program. And I'll start the next slide, Anna, and then I'll turn it over to you. So just to mention, Anna's going to go over some of the highlights from last year. I will just brag on Maryland for one moment here. One of the things we are really excited about at the Department of Natural Resources, as Maryland is in session right now, is the governor's Chesapeake Bay Legacy Act. This is a proposal that's really a comprehensive plan to address agricultural, fisheries, aquaculture, and permitting to allow us to tackle some of these larger challenges that we are seeing in the Chesapeake Bay. So just a couple of areas that this bill is going to address is modernizing our water quality program here at DNR, creating longer lease agreements on DNR-owned lands for regenerative farming practices, and streamlining our fisheries management plan so we are more able to adapt to changing environmental conditions. Anna.
All right, and now I'm going to go over some of the things that the Bay Commission, our members, have accomplished over the last just 2024. Across the board, all 3 of our states have been working on what we call pay for performance or pay for outcomes programs. So basically, we know what the problem is. We have too much pollution going into the waterways and out to the Bay. Instead of telling you the solution, we're going to say, you come up with the solution, and then we'll pay you for the reductions you managed to create. It's really incentivizing people to be creative about what they come up with. We don't have all the answers. We recognize that you can probably go further than we can if we just kind of give you the reins. So in all 3 states, we're pushing for these programs that really allow people to be creative, come up with solutions, and then we'll pay them based on the performance of that solution. All 3 of our states also have state-funded agriculture cost share programs. And what that means is we are supporting farmers. We're helping farmers with both technical assistance and financial assistance to put practices on their operations that reduce runoff, polluted runoff into their streams, into their local streams, and then ultimately the Bay. That means things like fencing their livestock out of streams, which is good for their livestock and good for their streams. Things like putting in manure treatment practices that prevent the manure from just running into the waterway. we're able to help them pay for part of, if not all of that practice, so that they'll put it in place. They benefit, we benefit. And it's a great partnership. This is the first time we've had all 3 states running their own state-funded programs, which is really exciting. They've all learned from each other how to do this really well. Pennsylvania just recently put $50 million per year in a dedicated fund for the Clean Streams Fund, which helps fund that program. Previously, they had been putting federal funds in, which is great, but it's not their own money. This is the first time they're putting their own revenue into that program. And with some of those programs, they've been able to delist 4 streams. So they've taken 4 streams off of the impaired list, put them back on the healthy list. In Virginia, their cost share program has had record funding the last few years. And so their achievement has really gone through the roof in what they've been able to put in place. And we haven't even seen kind of the full benefits of that when you actually look in the water. There's a lag time between when you put the practice in and when you see the benefit. So we're really excited about what that's going to look like in a couple of years. In Maryland, our members put in place the whole Watershed Act, and we're working in partnership with DNR on implementing that. And that's really about focusing on the needs of a local watershed. So not the big wide bay, but let's look locally at your own backyard, your own watershed. What does it need to be healthy in all ways, right? So not just clean water, but let's look at the ecosystem, the habitat, and let's kind of plan holistically about putting in multiple projects that serve multiple benefits at the same time through partnership. Maryland has also been the leader when it comes to PFAS. If you know what per and polyfluoral alkyl substances are, the forever chemical, right? They're the things that make things either non-stick or non-flammable. Once they get in your waterways and get in your body, it's hard for them to break down. They bioaccumulate. They are linked to cancer and other bad health conditions. So Maryland has really been leading the way in all 3 of our states to kind of confront PFAS contamination from the source, not just mitigation, but kind of stopping it from the source. And all our other 2 states are learning from that example. And then in Washington, we managed before the end of the last Congress to reauthorize the Chesapeake Bay program. That's the core of all of this work, right? That's the EPA and their ability to bring the partners together to facilitate the conversations. That program office was about to reach the end of its authorizations. We managed to reauthorize it before that Congress ended. We also got some stormwater authorities in the National Defense Authorization Act. So helping the Department of Defense take care of the stormwater on their own installations, because ultimately it affects our waterways. And then we continue to work on the Farm Bill, which was supposed to be reauthorized 2 years ago, still hasn't been, but it's really important because there's a lot of programs in the Farm Bill that affect farmers. And if you want to know how the Bay is doing, you ask how our farms are doing, honestly. Let's see. All right. Oh, you're blocking part of my title here. So the last thing I want to touch on before we turn it over to you for your questions is really what's going on in DC. Everything we touched on so far assumes that the Bay program and the restoration effort continues to be a voluntary, bipartisan, multi-jurisdictional effort that is led by the states, but supported by the federal government. States determine how they meet their Bay Agreement commitments. They write the plans, they set forth the practices, they put skin in the game, right? So they're funding it, they're putting in, they have the people in place to help do the work, but they need federal agencies to provide the science, the technical assistance, the funding support, just the help so that states can meet the goals that they set for themselves. Every administrative transition disrupts the day-to-day of these agencies temporarily. And I mean that honestly. Every single one does, because once you get new leadership into these agencies, anything that comes out of that agency comes out under the auspices of that leadership. So they need to know what's happening. And so there's always a bit of a break while they get their hands around what's going on, what's about to be announced, and make sure that they can keep it in line with their point of view and their mission. We generally see short pauses in this period of time and restructuring of programs and regulations. However, I think it is safe to say that this administration does not intend to stick with simply what is precedented, right? They're not going for what we see each time an administration turns over. They are really pushing to do something bold and different. That's based on the number of executive orders they put out, based on the across the board reductions they're planning in the federal workforce, and the goal of finding $2 trillion in funding cuts. So they're planning big. All of these are going to have an impact on the Bay program because all of these are going to affect the federal agencies we work with. That means the scientists that help our fishery managers understand what decisions to make when they're managing our fisheries. It's the projects that restore the oyster reefs that we depend on, both economically and environmentally. Education trips, environmental education trips for students. NOAA supports those. If NOAA's budget's cut, especially for environment, then we got to figure out what we do to make sure students are getting out on the water. What else? Oh, those livestock fences I talked about. If USDA's budget is cut, then we have to figure out how do we make sure that we're still helping farmers pay for those fences. And oftentimes they've already bought the fence, so they're looking to be reimbursed. So we really need to make sure that we're keeping faith with our farmers on those things. All of these projects, all of these different things that our federal agencies work for, that means jobs, small businesses, people that are impacted. So we collectively as a program, we have to figure out how we manage that moving forward. The good news, EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin was here in Annapolis last week, and he shared his support for the Chesapeake Bay program and the restoration effort. So we have EPA's support in the work that we do, and that's critical because they are the spine of this. They are the backbone that keeps this running. And as we mentioned, Travis Boyles, formerly in Virginia, is over there with Lee Zeldin, and he knows what we're doing and is an advocate for us. So that's great to have. We also have the support of our congressional delegation, bipartisan support. Last year, Representative Whitman, a Republican in Virginia, worked with Senators Van Hollen and Cardin here in Maryland to reauthorize the Bay program that I mentioned. So that bipartisan support for that has been what sustained it. Representative Andy Harris here on the Eastern Shore, he's a member of the Chesapeake Bay Watershed Task Force. He helps us with our budget requests. He's been critical on blue catfish, invasive blue catfish. In Pennsylvania, we have G.T. Thompson. He's the chair of the Agriculture Committee. He's writing the next farm bill. He's a Pennsylvanian. He knows Pennsylvania farms. He knows how important conservation programs are. Senator Fetterman, he's on the Senate Ag Committee. So we have people in place and we have bipartisan support. That is critical. It has been what has sustained this program for 40 years, no matter who is president or what's going on nationally. But in the years past, that bipartisan support has been in conversation with the White House when it comes to budgets. So that's really what this is going to hinge on. We have to make sure that Congress and the White House are talking about the future of funding when it comes to these programs. If Congress can do what it has in the past and step up and support us in a bipartisan fashion, I'm not worried. We just have to make sure that Congress has a place in that conversation and is in the room to help advocate for us at the right time. So with that, I'll simply say thank you. Happy to answer any questions you have to the best that we're able to, right, Leila? And like I said at the top, the only way that this program continues to grow and progress is if it's state-led, federally supported, bipartisan, collaborative, voluntary. That's the mission to get us through and beyond 2025.
All right. I'd love to open it up for questions. We've got people in the room. If you're in the room, I have a microphone and we'll come to you so you can ask a question and then our people online can hear. And if you are online, there's a Q&A feature. You can put your question there and our moderator in the room will let us know so that we can get your question asked. All right. Can you talk a little bit about how you both got into this work and how the collaboration and the network, I think so much of it hinges on the relationships. That's part of what I heard you say. And so can you talk a little bit about the community that you're working in and how you found yourself in this work as well?
Do you want to take that first, Leila?
I will take it first. I have a bit of an unusual circuitous route into this. As you heard at the top, I have a PhD in organometallic chemistry from the University of Maryland, which is occasionally useful if you want to talk about PFAS and why they're forever chemicals and why the carbon-fluorine bond is really, really strong, then I'm your woman. But on the whole, as really technical expertise in organometallic chemistry is not necessarily applicable here. How I got here is that when I was getting my PhD, I realized I didn't want to do lab work every day. But I realized that I cared deeply about science, and I cared about it because it's a tool that can be used to make the world around us better. And that doesn't mean I have to be at the bench. That means, in fact, I can help translate information, make sure that it is applicable in a place where it can do good in these larger policy decisions. So I ended up getting a fellowship to work on Capitol Hill. I worked for Congressman John Sarbanes, formerly of the Maryland 3rd District. I handled his environment and energy policy, which was very heavily Chesapeake focused. So I worked for him for 3.5 years. The Congressman recently retired, and it transpires that I'd been working pretty closely with the Maryland Department of Natural Resources for several years at that point, trying to make sure that our coordination between Capitol Hill and our state partner was really strong in this effort. So I am relatively new to this role. I came in a couple months ago here at DNR, but I really think what is impressive to me about the Chesapeake is that it is something that reaches out and grabs you. I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, so I never expected to be so personally invested in the restoration of a large body of water, if I can be frank. But when I came to school at University of Maryland, it was so clear to me that the Chesapeake is such a part of the state. And so when I later went on to look at other policy experiences, that really resonated with me. So circuitous route, but here I am now. And Anna, we have a fun thing in common about our background here.
Yeah. So basically what it is divergence that then comes together in the middle, right? So unlike Leila, I grew up on the Patuxent River. So I participated in a environmental education trip where they took us out on a canoe and made us measure underwater grasses and look at Secchi discs to see how clear the water was. I did not know after that trip that I was going to dedicate my life to the bay and the Patuxent River, but it stuck with me in some way. I went to law school, so I went that side of things where Leila went through the science side of things. And I enjoyed law school. I enjoyed learning about policy and writing law, not necessarily about trying to sue people. So I wanted to go the policy route, right? The law making, the law interpretation, not the lawsuit. Also went to work for Representative Sarbanes, also worked on his environmental portfolio. But when I left, I didn't go work for state government. I went and worked for the James River Association. I was an advocate at an NGO. I was lobbying Virginia legislators when it comes to the health of the James River. And eventually found myself at the commission because it brings together the state policy and the federal policy in a really neat way that I've enjoyed.
Thank you. We have a question that came in online. What is the percentage increase in funding that would be needed to meet the WIP goals? And how much more land would need to be protected to meet the restoration goals?
Ooh, I don't know that we have an answer to how much money would it take to close the gap on the WIPs. There's some tools that are out there to try to estimate that. But as soon as you make an estimate, it's immediately wrong. Basically the same way that as soon as you plan to build a house and you go to the contractor, they immediately tell you inflation has lifted the price. So it's going to take a sizable amount, especially because what we've gotten at the low-hanging fruit. So some of the earliest wins we had were very expensive. They were wastewater upgrades. It was upgrading our wastewater treatment plants. Expensive, but easy because you could install technology, turn it on, operate it, and know that your effluent, the water coming out, was cleaner. What's left is agriculture practices, which are more cost efficient, but harder because you have to go through the work of convincing people and building relationships, and development, right? So we have to do stormwater practices in urban and suburban communities. Those are expensive. So the work is harder what's left for us to do. It's potentially more expensive than what we've already done, and inflation isn't helping that. So it's a sizable cost coming at us. And if we don't have the federal support that we've been able to rely on to this point, it's even tougher for our states, and they're already facing some pretty difficult financial situations. I don't know if you have more to add to that, Leila.
All I was going to say is that, yeah, we don't know the answers to those specific points. How much would it take land-wise or money-wise? What we can do is, as part of this revision process of the Beyond 2025, ask all of our partners to say, based on the information that we have now, you know, how long do we think this might take? What do we think are reasonable, achievable goals to set for ourselves? So I'm hopeful that over the next year, what we will be able to put forward is our best understanding of the progress that we can make in the next time period.
And on the protected lands front, we do know what the gap is between how much land we've protected and what we set for ourselves in 2025. I just don't know off the top of my head. However, the lands protection folks will remind us that was their interim step. There's another step after that they want to take. So we know what they wanted to do by 2025, but they have plans for 2035, 2045. So there's more work to do.
So I guess, can you talk a little bit about that and how the dialogue around restoration has evolved? Because I think that's one of the things that I've seen since, you know, the plan was initially issued, and just in the last 10 years, like talking about livable communities, and, you know, the report cards went from just measuring nitrogen and phosphorus to also looking at measures of diversity and community, and as well as like some thought scholarship about, is it actually restoration that's trying to be achieved? And I know that complicates your work as well, because the way that we're talking about it is changing, or the way that scholars are talking about it is shifting, which also kind of shifts your targets. So I guess I'll toss that out there. How have the last 10 years also influenced what you're thinking about in this next iteration?
Do you want to start that, Leila, or do you want me to?
Yeah, I'll jump in. Okay. I'll say that, so one of the things that we've been using in the last few years in particular is a report that came out from an advisory commission that's part of the Chesapeake Bay program. And this report was called the Comprehensive Evaluation of a Systems Response, the CESA report, as we call it. And this really looked at, you know, what's been working for us, what's been happening as a result of that, and some really interesting things came out of that report. One of the things was a real emphasis on living resources, on the fact that we need to quote actually something that Anna said to me when I was still on the Hill, a bathtub is clean, a bathtub is not a thriving ecosystem. So when we think about what we're trying to get out of this process, what's our vision for the Chesapeake? A huge part of it is that we have a thriving ecosystem. So that's been something that's been really, really top of mind for a lot of people in this process. Other things that have come up, and again, Anna will be able to speak to this because she was in the room having these conversations in the initial scoping Beyond 25 process, but the idea of conservation, right? We talk about restoration a lot, we talk about protection a lot, but there's a whole suite of options when we think about conservation that can be about making sure that we're not losing the progress that we've gained. It can be making sure that we're not developing in places that are really critical to our goals. So elevating conservation has been a big topic of conversation in the partnership. And then the largest thing, again, that I think that I've noticed coming in fairly recently is an emphasis on people. You know, I would hazard a guess that all of you all in the room and potentially online really care about the Bay and think that it's worth restoring and cleaning because it's a national treasure and it's in our backyard. But if you even take that aside, you look at all the impacts that the Bay has, and really those are impacts on people. Those are impacts on being able to get to the water and go swimming. Those are being able to fish. Those are being able to have clean air. and cleaner waters in your own space, whether that's, again, right on the coast or further inland. So yeah, I think in general, what I've been seeing over the last few years is a shift in emphasis away from those metrics that you've been talking about, that you mentioned, nitrogen, phosphorus, onto why does this matter for us as a partnership. Anna?
Yeah, and if I could point out two shifts that I've seen, not in the last 40 years, because I won't pretend to have been here in 1983 when the first agreement was signed. But what I've seen is, first, we have dispensed with the idea that we're getting back to John Smith's Chesapeake Bay. We will never get back to that point. We have, 18 million people in this watershed to care for and to work with when it comes to a sustainable bay. So what we need to figure out is, what does a healthy, sustainable bay look like that gives to us and we give back? It is not the bay that John Smith saw. And then the second point is, when we talk about the Bay program in Pennsylvania, West Virginia, New York, we don't talk about the Bay. They don't care about the Bay. When I go to the northern tier of Pennsylvania and meet with Senator Gene Yaw, a Republican who is on our commission, his constituents, when they think of going to see water and experiencing water, they go to the Finger Lakes. They don't come down to the Bay. So when he talks to his constituents about conservation and doing some of the practices, he says, it's important for your local streams. It's important if you're an angler, if you like to go see trout in your local streams. If it's important if your kids like to play outside in their own backyard. We speak to them about what they value. We don't speak to them about the Bay, because that is not what brings them to this work. And so it's meeting people where they are. It's delivering the benefit that they expect to where they are, in service eventually to what we know the Bay needs.
Oh, another question online. They're winning right now, people in the room. All right. Recently, the Chesapeake Bay was nominated or designated as a national park unit. How does that affect restoration outcomes, if there are any?
All you, Leila.
Thank you so much. Yes, I can speak to this with a lot of expertise because Congressman Sarbanes was one of the introducers of that bill. So the Chesapeake National Recreation Area. The idea is that the Chesapeake is a national treasure, and it should, in the same way that we all know the Grand Canyon, and there's a national park there that elevates that and provides the world-class interpretive and recreational and conservation expertise of the National Park Service, that the Chesapeake Bay makes sense for another area there. I will note, of course, we're in a region where there are a lot of National Park Service units, but there's not one that is focused on the Chesapeake Bay, on its history, on its impact on culture, and on its really unique landscapes. So the idea of the CNRA is that it would be, well, it has not been introduced this Congress, so I don't know what the authors are going to be doing to it from here on out. But at least in the last Congress, the idea was, unlike out west, where you can have these really large areas, perhaps, that can be designated as national parks, that's not really so much going to be the case in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. So what we were looking at, instead of a big cohesive unit, is what we're calling a string of pearls. So small areas all across the bay that can highlight really specific historic, environmental, recreational aspects of the bay, and again, bring that world-class knowledge and technical assistance from the National Park Service. Of course, that also tends to bring tourism, which is great for the local economies, but sometimes people have questions for how does that impact the conservation aspect of it. Are we going to have more plastic bottles in the bay? And I will say again, one of the highlights of the CNRA is that it was never intended. It's very much intended to be protection first, protection, elevation, and education. The bill was passed in the Senate at the very end of last Congress. It just simply ran out of time in the House. So I am also looking forward to seeing what happens next with it. So again, the idea is that not that the CNRA would be protecting these large swaths of the bay, but it would be a voluntary opportunity for really unique and interesting pieces around the Bay to come together under this larger umbrella of what NPS can help us do as a region.
Excellent, thank you.
I didn't hear or see any mention of the Critical Areas Commission. How do they fit into the Chesapeake Bay Program Partnership, if they do?
Do you want to take that, Leila, or do you?
I will start it.
Okay.
But so Critical Areas Commission is very Maryland focused on making sure that we have a good understanding of how in particular on our shorelines, how development there, how restoration there is progressing, because we've recognized that those shorelines are a really important part of our overall restoration work. In terms of the actual fit in of the larger Bay program, Critical Areas Commission is within the Department of Natural Resources. And so Secretary Kurtz, as the current chair of what's called the Principal Staff Committee, is very looped in to Critical Areas Commission. And I will say that I'm working closely with their former chair. So it's part of Maryland's approach right now is very much trying to make sure that all of our sister agencies are on the same page. And Critical Areas Commission has long been a real advocate for conservation in the state.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I mentioned that each of the states has their own watershed implementation plan, right? So each state has developed a plan for how they're going to meet their pollution reduction goals. I would assume that in Maryland, they have calculated within that plan the role that the Critical Area Commission plays in protecting that part of those lands from encroachment or development, from making sure that they're, vegetated, and that calculus of depending on the Critical Area Commission to do its job is part of reaching the ultimate pollution reduction goal. Virginia has a similar, but not quite as, I would say, like robust way of protecting their riparian areas, the same kind of region along your waterways. And they too assume some level of protection of those areas because of their program when it comes to their watershed implementation plan. If that program isn't working, if the Critical Area Commission isn't doing its job, then it's going to be that much harder for the state to complete its implementation plan and reach its pollution reduction goal.
All right, then I'm going to ask you both one last question, and that is, what is keeping you up at night, but also what is giving you hope?
I'll go first, Leila. Give you some time to think of a good answer, because I'm just going to give a mediocre one. What's keeping me up at night? Landing the plane on refreshing the agreement. It is unfortunate that 2025 rolls around in a moment that kind of shows the soft underbelly of the Chesapeake Bay program, right? We've kind of put everything on the table to be refreshed and updated. We're exposing all of the sticky points and the pressure points and the sore points of our work together at the same time as the country is going through this huge change of its own, and all the federal agencies are trying to figure out what that means for them. I did not anticipate 2 years ago that these moments would hit at the same time, and that we would have to manage both transitions at once. So that's what's keeping me up at night, is managing that transition, making sure all our partners feel supported in this moment, making sure everyone feels heard, and trying to land this process in a way that we can be proud of, while respecting the fact that it will never be perfect, but we can do our best and make sure that we have done our best to position ourselves for the future.
Yeah, man, that's an existential question there. I think part of what keeps me up at night is thinking about some of these large overarching challenges that it can feel like we individually don't have a lot of control over. If you want to think about your climate changes, or even sometimes things like, you know, the results of different elections. You know, it's something that when things feel out of your control, it's an easy recipe for staying up at night. The thing that gives me a lot of hope is that I have felt incredibly privileged to just, as I've come into this space, work with some of the smartest, most driven, and passionate people. And that's not just speaking to people in the government or in, you know, specific professional roles in this partnership. I mean, I see it every single day, how much people care about this work. And, you know, that more than anything gives me a lot of optimism that as we come together, we're going to be able to address these challenges because people deeply, deeply care about them. And, you know, I think I think part of why I'm still working in the Bay world is just because that's really kind of intoxicating. It really makes you want to be a part of that team and put your oar in and start rowing.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for being here and for being so flexible in scheduling and managing technology. It's been really helpful to hear what's been going on and what's coming. We appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone.